Hey guys, welcome to the new episode of the Andy Social Podcast. And once you're done here, make sure to head over to Goat King Writers Club,
where we never let grammar get in the way of a good story.
Good yarn.
Yarn? Story? Fuck, doesn't matter, does it?
Well, it does when we're doing the promo for it.
Oh well, that's what they're getting.
Also, come and check us out on YouTube for full video versions. Enjoy the show.
Hey, welcome back. Go on, plonk your ass down. It's episode 296 of me little old show, the Andy Social Podcast. And my guest on this episode is author and podcaster Thommy Waite. Thommy just put out a book called Any Day You Can Die, which I just recently finished reading. As you do with a book, you read it. And anyone who follows me on Instagram will see that every month I post a photo of the books that I had just finished reading for the previous month. And Tommy's book was in either the March or the April photo or something like that. But just a fantastic book. Really enjoyed it. I'll let Thommy explain what the book's all about. And we obviously dig into all the topics surrounding the book as well in this chat. Really, really great chat. So stay tuned for that. But Tommy's also got a podcast called Square Record. In fact, by the time this episode comes out, my guest appearance on his podcast is already out as well. So I'll put a link in the show notes so you can check that out. But I'll have his main website, TommyWaite.com. He's on the socials, Instagram and Twitter at Thommy Waite. He's got a YouTube channel. I'll put Amazon links to purchase the book, which I highly recommend. So definitely check that out. And before we kick into it, a little thank you. Credit where credit's due. Thank you to my Patreon supporter, Andrew from Perth, who actually sent me a copy of Any Day You Can Die in the mail with a little note saying, I reckon you'll enjoy this book and Thommy could be a really good podcast guest for the future. And, well, look what happened. I've now got a new mate. So thank you so much, Andrew. Just absolutely stoked with your generosity, the gift. The book is amazing, and obviously being able to do Tommy's podcast and Thommy to be on my podcast is just fantastic. So thank you to Andrew, and everything that we discussed will be in the show notes over at andysocial.net and andydowling.net. So enough crapping on from me. Please enjoy this great chat with Thommy Waite. Yeah, mate, we've just done your podcast, so thanks for having me on. And now we're diving right into, I guess, well, it's kind of round two, or it's round 1/2. Yeah, so thanks
second half.
Yeah, second half. Thanks for jumping onto my podcast.
No worries, man. Thanks for having me.
So you mentioned it in your episode. I'm gonna give him double props as well. Massive thank you to Andrew who got us connected. He out of the blue, I was on my way to the pub and I thought I need to go to the post office and pick up a couple of things. And sure enough, you know, got this bad boy in the mail, and a little note from Andrew just saying, hey, you might like this. Basically, a little note here, lovely note from him, and
nice.
Just saying, yeah, he saw you at Perth Fringe and got a copy of the book and living in Colombia, and just said, think you might like it, and you might like to get him on the podcast one day. So there you go. And he actually signed off Andrew and Fry, and Fry's his dog. So there you go. So thanks, Andrew. But
good on you, Andrew.
Random book in the post, got the message, and look, I'll always give Andrew a bit of time. So, you know, it wasn't just a random book. I'm like, I'll get to it eventually. I thought, no, I need to make good on this. So I need to actually read it. And I think a good way to start is, mate, that first fucking paragraph, I tell you what, if I want to feel like a fucking prude, it certainly did it. I went, what the hell have I just opened up? Was there, I mean, without sort of really sort of going into, well, I mean, you can go into detail if you want to, but, you know, was there an intention to sort of really grab people straight away with how intense that first sort of section of that book is?
Yeah, I think you want to grab the reader's attention. But I kind of took a cue from music as well. I always like albums that start with a massive punch. There's this album by the Australian band UMI called Convicts, and it starts with this song, Thank God I've Hit the Bottom. And it's probably their most like punk rock tune. And anyway, it's just like the perfect way to start that album. It's loud and abrasive and in your face. And so I kind of wanted to do that with the book. And yeah, it's essentially an explicit sex scene, and I knew that the book was going to lead to some kind of like hardcore parts, and so I guess I was trying to do the reader a solid as well, where I was like, if you're not into this type of stuff, put it down now. I don't want to, I think that's where you fuck with people if you kind of like start things like a fucking Enid Blyton a whimsical tale, and then chapter 3 the weird sex starts happening. So I was like, if I start early, at least someone who is it's maybe too much, which it sounded like you were on the verge of putting it down, but yeah, that was my intention as well, is to kind of be like, this is where it's going to head. There's obviously a lot more in the book, but yeah, the nature of the tale is pretty aggressive, and it's meant to be like an inflammatory book. So I thought, why not start with kind of the most inflammatory and see who sticks around?
Oh man, I'm glad I stuck around, because I was at the point of reading this. I'm like, I think you misjudged this one, Andrew. I really don't know if this is the book for me, man. I've got no idea. Like, should be something I should be hiding under my mattress or something as a teenager. Like, it was full on, but obviously, getting into the actual story itself and all the context around it. I mean, it's a fantastic book, man. Like, it's really, really good. I absolutely enjoyed it, and it is not the type of book that I normally go to. Like, it's not something that I sort of go out of my way to read. And I think one thing, and obviously doing a bit of digging on my side, and I know that you're somebody who's got a reputation for digging around and stalking people's profiles on social media. But I did a bit of the same. And while I was reading this, I was trying to find that where reality for you as yourself is versus the fiction aspects of this book. And I was trying to piece it all together. And obviously there's parts of the book where I go, oh, this is clearly the story, but there's other parts of it I'm thinking, how much of this is your own personal experience along the way? So from my understanding, you lived in Colombia for a couple of years, and this is
3 years, 2017 to 2020.
Yeah. And so I guess maybe just to backtrack a little bit, what was the motivation of all the places in the world to go to Colombia? And can you pronounce the name of the city again? Because I was trying to retain in my head, and it doesn't sound anywhere like it's spelt. Yeah,
so it's Medellin.
Medellin, that's right.
Yeah, that's how the locals say it. Hence that's how I say it. But yeah, in terms of how I ended up in Colombia, I was living in. I'm originally from Perth. I actually lived in Sydney for 3 years to finish uni, and then that's where I started working. And then I went to New York for the majority of my 20s, and I started working online in 2015 or 2016. I kind of like stopped working for the man. I got like myself a remote job, and my missus was going back to Perth to see her family, and it was February. We were living in New York. It was freezing cold, and I was like, I want to go somewhere. And we didn't have much money, and so I was like, I'll go. And she told me about Medellin. It was becoming popular for digital nomads, and so I thought, fuck it, I can get a direct flight from New York, and so I flew down there just to check it out. And that was in 2016. We had a really good. I had a really good time. I made some cool friends, and then fast forward 2 years later, we had a baby. And then we decided that New York is great pre-baby, post-baby, everything was going to get far more expensive and hectic. And we thought, why? Most people have a sprog and they move to the suburbs. We were like, yeah, nah, fuck it. Let's go to Latin America, where Pablo Escobar used to rule over. And so, because I had the context of like, I knew it was on, up and coming, and it was kind of risk free. We thought if it didn't work out, we can just try somewhere else. And moved there and realized it was going to be a counterintuitively a really good place to base ourselves with a young family, affordable, and it's a really beautiful place and lots to do and see. And so, that was essentially my time in Colombia, and I was really happy over there. But then COVID changed things, and we just decided to come back to Perth to ride COVID out. But that's essentially how I ended up in Medellin.
So over there, was it a case of, because I'm thinking about the storyline of the book and sort of the way that things play out in the book. Was it a case that you went over there with the thought that you were going to start writing while you were there, or was it more of a case of just being surrounded by this, this foreign environment and seeing, what you sort of have spoken about, where there's a lot of expats there, these digital nomads, where you started to see this weird sort of melting pot of different people that you thought maybe I can put something together and talk about my experiences here? Was this like, what was the sequence of events when it came to sort of putting it all together?
Yeah, so the main the Tony, the narrator and main character in Any Day You Can Die, is an aspiring writer. And in terms of my personal, I tried to get a lot of writing projects off the ground in my 20s and never really had I don't know whether it was balls or I probably didn't have much to say. It was part of the problem, is that I wasn't, didn't really have that much life experience. And I tried to like do a bunch of travel to kind of to have something to write about. And it didn't really work. I didn't have anything that interesting, but I think it was also kind of like laziness and a lack of courage as well. But when I became a father, I went kind of the opposite direction for 5 minutes, where I was like, I got to earn money. I've got to provide. If we're going to psychoanalyze myself, I thought, I am man, I must provide. And so I kind of like went, I wouldn't say full corporate, but I was just like very motivated to earn money and try and provide for my child. But then when I was in Medellin, I went the opposite direction a little bit. I kind of realized that was not who I truly was. And I was almost like, if I continue down this path, I could earn a lot of money, but my son won't really know who I am. So I guess that really then I was like, no, fuck, I need to get serious, because I've got a baby now, but one day he's going to grow up and I want him to kind of like actually know who I am. So I guess that's the real kind of emotional spine of like me getting serious. And that was coupled by the fact that like when we were living in Medellin, it was just a really interesting time to be there. It reminded me of the stories that I've read about like what it was like to be in Thailand in the 90s, which inspired The Beach by Alex Garland, and like all the stories of hippies going to Afghanistan and India in the 70s and the 60s and 70s. So I was like, I feel like I'm a part of like this weird mass mobilization of expats because of the internet. And, there were just interesting stories that came out of it. And, I really just tried to like cherry pick the most like salacious and smash them all together. And that Any Day You Can Die is basically the story that came out of that.
I think there's definitely a point there in the book itself where I think Tony's having that sort of identity sort of crisis that you sort of alluded to, where he's sort of like, I've been traveling and what am I actually here for? What am I meant to be doing? And you sort of get distracted. And I think there was like a couple of things where he had all the best intentions, but then ends up going out and getting blasted and pissed and whatever, or ends up on a YouTube rabbit hole or whatever, just watching like these videos on online. And it's just interesting to see, like, I guess obviously being in such a foreign land and no doubt being stimulated by so many different things. And I guess in these particular places where, because I'm not as familiar with Medellin in comparison to like, Thailand and like parts of Southeast Asia where you've got a lot of expats that sort of, it's an expat hub where these people go to. It's cheaper. It's a different lifestyle. The weather's usually, a little bit nicer than other parts of the world where people are traditionally from. But no doubt having, like, and I think you sort of mentioned this before, like sort of seeing all these different sort of storylines happening around you, where you could see people trying to adjust and trying to find their place, that eventually, like for your side, you're sort of thinking, well, I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm an expat here as well. What am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do with this time? What am I going to do with this opportunity? And to find that sort of encouragement and motivation to, I guess in your case, put pen to paper and actually put something together. I guess, that's a big process and obviously probably a whirlwind of emotions and sort of psychotic behavior where you're trying to find out sort of where do I fit into this big wide world?
Yeah. And, in all fairness, though, COVID helped me finish the book, though, because I came back to Perth and there was like a very small lockdown. But I was like back in Perth, and that kind of gave me the focus. It was almost like Medellin inspired the book, but then like being back home outside of it gave me the like a little more perspective and kind of like focus the story as well. And I think what's also curious about those like expat communities and what I was trying to explore with the book is that it's kind of like a neo-colonial story where people are going over there and they're like appreciating the riches over there, whether it be like, you know, the positive stuff in terms of like the beautiful city and like all the trips you can do, or like I guess the drugs and the girls, like all the stuff that's there for you to do. But there's also kind of like this undercurrent of like, I'm only here because I need to make things work with my like clients in the US or in Europe. So there's kind of like this extraction process happening, and like the expats kind of like banding together and enjoying the fruits of the local habitat, but kind of like not really committing to it at the same time. And that's really kind of what I felt in a weird way, where I was like, I felt kind of like, why am I here? why have I failed in the first world? And like, why have I kind of like exiled myself in a weird way? And so, fortunately I had like enough things to keep me on the straight and narrow, my family and I guess the book being the main two. But I could see how quite easily it would be to go to the dark side, and that makes good fodder for naughty stories for boys and girls. So that's the stuff that got funneled into the story, into Any Day You Can Die.
You kind of see. I mean, there's a couple of characters in the story where, yeah, they're trying to really play up to that whole digital nomad lifestyle, but more of the lifestyle rather than the actual, the results of being a digital nomad. Is more about the identity of being somebody who can do the Instagram photos or the YouTube videos in these beautiful locations on the other side of the world, these exotic places, and it's more about the persona rather than the mechanics of actually sort of what's it going to result in. But you kind of see that in life in general. Like, I guess that aspect of the book is so relatable because we see it every time we turn on a social media app, on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. We're seeing everybody, or a lot of people, trying to put themselves out there in the best possible light. And so they're looking for those Instagram or those photo opportunities. I mean, these days I'm living in Pyrmont in Sydney, and I'm smack bang in the middle of the city, and like almost every day I'm walking across Pyrmont Bridge, and you see them, like they're all like getting like the selfie photos. They've got the selfie sticks. It's beyond that now. They've got the boyfriends who are taking photos with the hold a hand thing, like they're looking off in the distance or whatever. Like, here, hold my hand, and you walk past and you just want to ruin their photos. You so want to just get in there and just go, fuck off, get out of my city. But it's just amazing to see how much it's engulfed people, and you realize that the aesthetic and that perception that you're putting out there, the value that has been put on that is so much higher than whatever the hell contribution you're actually adding to society. So it was interesting following some of these characters in the book, because I think ultimately, and without giving away too much of the book, it was only until they all had a common purpose, and a really fucking risky one, but once they all sort of were on the same page and they had an idea or something they could execute on, that they kind of had a purpose. They had something to work towards. Before then, they were all sort of, everyone's just floating around and just trying to look like they're living the lifestyle, that lifestyle that everyone sort of craves for. Maybe just one thing and maybe a side note, because I just sort of mentioned it and it's jogged my memory, because we're darting around this book, but maybe it might be a good idea just to like give a quick snapshot overall of what the story is. Yeah,
sure. So the main character of Tony, he is a disgruntled corporate worker in Melbourne. He decides to fly to Medellin, Colombia to kind of like restart his life. And the original plan that he embarks on is to finish an unfinished novel and kind of like learn a little bit about Medellin and, you know, do all the kind of like touristy stuff. But he moves into like this frat house in the middle of kind of like where the Expat Central, which is called El Poblado in Medellin, and it's kind of like a playground for expats. And I think he slowly gets more interested in. It's a weird thing because he's clearly like disgusted by the expat community and kind of like thinks he's above it, but it's a case of staring into the abyss a little too long. And over the course of the novel, he kind of like, I guess, becomes the worst version of what he detests, and gets some other people on board as well. But that's essentially the kind of like synopsis of the story.
Yeah, as I said earlier, it's something that once you sort of really get into the guts of it, it's sort of like a snowball effect, or, you know, a chain reaction. You can't stop. It's I mean, all cliche things that people say about reading books, you know, but it's one of those things where it's just you're constantly sort of just getting ready for that next sequence, that next event that's coming along. You can almost, in some respects, see where things are going. Like, you can kind of think, oh, you're a fucking idiot. Like, why are you about to do that? You know what's going to happen. And then sure enough, they find themselves in a situation where it's coming back to bite them on the ass. And but it's just a fantastic book. And I think it doesn't do any favors for any stereotypes or reputation that Colombia has, for sure. And I had somebody on the podcast a few years ago, Rusty Young, who Rusty Young. Oh God, I've got two Rusties on the podcast. Rusty Young, author who wrote Marching Powder and Colombiano, and you know, a guy who is just, you know, from the Colombiano was fiction, but you know, lived a long time in Colombia, and sort of talking about the dark side of Colombia and the sort of guerrilla armies and child soldiers and things like that. And so when I picked up your book, I sort of had a bit of a lens of my stereotypes of Colombia, and then reading your book, I'm like, oh yeah, cool. All right. Well, it sounds like a pretty fun and wild place, but yeah, it seems pretty fucking ruthless. So, I mean, I guess where I'm leading with this, and I mean, you can definitely comment on that, but I guess the question that I would have is your actual experiences over there. What were they? What was your summarized sort of experiences of living in Colombia for 2 years? Were the stereotypes sort of met, or were you surprised with what you actually experienced from the locals more so than the expats?
Yeah, so I guess it was that first trip that I did in 2016 when I went by myself, that 2-week period. That's where I had the most trepidation, where I was like, what's this all about? I did minimal research before going. And so, that first trip was really eye-opening because, it was just first of all, you're struck by how friendly Colombians are. Very few people speak English, unless you go to a super expat-friendly hotel, restaurant, or bar or whatever. And so everyone's speaking Spanish, but they're very accommodating for people who don't speak a lick of Spanish, and, you know, generous and you know, that it's definitely a relaxed culture where they don't really give a shit about if things run 15, 30 minutes late. So there's kind of like this, it's a European, I guess, kind of like Spanish Mediterranean kind of vibe. But yeah, in terms of living there, it's paradise. And I think that like, that was like, for me, almost a part of the problem, where I'd come from like New York, where I'd developed like a real kind of like thick skin, drinking too much coffee, aggressive if anyone kind of looks at you sideways, and like, and so it was such a different change of pace to go to Medellin and like people be kind of like so accommodating and friendly. And I guess with the story, I tried to, because it's interesting. I've had a lot of people say, you know, they liked how I presented the Colombians in the story, because the expats are the ones getting up to no good, and like the Colombians are kind of like having to deal with the consequences of these like scumbag expats. And, for me, it's like a matter of perspective, really. It's like the story's told from like a very kind of like compromised perspective in terms of the narration of Tony. He's doesn't speak Spanish. He doesn't really understand the cultural implications of what's happening around him. He's got these like other people he lives with who kind of like compromised in their own specific ways. And, but also kind of like confronting the reality of like, when you live in Medellin, most expats are living in this bubble, this like very tourist friendly playground, which is catered to their every kind of like want and need. And so, when I was living there, I made an effort to kind of like go to interesting towns on the outskirts of Medellin and explore. And, through my son's nanny, we got to know kind of like traditional Colombian families and kind of like learn a bit more cultural stuff. But the vast majority of people, at least with the demographics that I was exploring with the novel, aren't going to do all that. They're going to have like a very isolated worldview in relation to what they're seeing in Medellin and Colombia at large. So I guess I tried to like focus on that, but also kind of like underline and use plenty of exclamation marks where there is danger there if you want to find it. It's like it's around every corner. And so that's what was kind of like tantalizing about the place, is that I feel completely safe living there. There's no way I would have stayed living there with my son was 7 months old when we moved there. So I wouldn't have stayed there, but you did hear stories of people who would like go looking for trouble and they would find it. So I was like, that's an interesting idea where you can just live kind of like in complete comfort and get by on very little money a month. You use the whole kind of like currency arbitrage thing to your advantage. But then also, if you decide to kind of like start flirting with the dark side, all that shit's there waiting for you as well. So that's kind of the kind of like yin and yang of what I was trying to explore with the book.
Did you find that when you went back to live there that you were very conscious or aware of the perception that locals had of yourself or just expats in general? Because I always think about, when I think of expats, I mean, the first place I always think of is Singapore. Singapore's like expat central. Like it's just, but it doesn't seem to be tarnished as such. It's it's almost like the city's been built for expats, or the country's been built for expats. But then you think about other places like Indonesia and other parts of Southeast Asia where it's almost like expats have just become this fucking, just this bacteria, this disease. It's just disgusting. This horrible stigma that's attached to it. Is that a challenge that you see from a sort of a high point, looking at sort of expats being in the area in Colombia and sort of, well, either choosing to integrate or just staying in their bubble? Do you see that? And were you conscious of it yourself as being a foreigner there? Like that maybe the locals were, obviously friendly, but if there was a lot of people coming over there, was that something that you were aware of?
Yeah, you're definitely kind of aware of it on like a base level. The common example they would give, there's like little cultural tics they have over there where they really like being like meticulously clean. Like the apartment we were living in, they there needed to be some renos, like the bathroom needed to get fixed up. So there were these like worker guys who'd come and work. And then when they would leave, they take ages to kind of like get themselves looking spotless. But just for like their ride home on their moto, they wouldn't even be like interacting with people, but they would like take great pride in their appearance. And like, whereas here, there's like tradies fucking filthy getting their like choc milk from the Caltex on the way home. They don't give a fuck. Like, and so, expats would go over there and like go hiking all day long and then get back to their hostel and then like go for beers in their like sweat stand or whatever. And so they would be like, all these Colombianos would look at the expats and be like, you dirty dogs, like have a shower before you're out in public. And like, you'll never see a Colombian wearing like flip-flops or thongs. They need to, that was another like massive telltale sign that you're an expat. So, like you kind of like, if you've got half a brain and you know at least a little bit of Spanish, you pick up on those cues and you can kind of like adjust. I didn't have to adjust my behavior by that much. And also I think I didn't give a shit. Like I knew that if I'd stayed there, I was eventually going to kind of like learn more about Colombian culture, but I didn't have kind of like a reason to accelerate it. Whereas, like some of my single buddies over there trying to meet Colombian women, they would be like, oh fuck, these dirtbag expats are really like letting me down, because some of them would just like completely stereotype you, and you think that you're essentially like all them, but ultimately it comes down to like individuals. Like there'd be lots of individuals over there who would see like dirtbag expats, and then they would and then they'd see you and they'd be able to like differentiate in terms of how you're behaving. So I have no issue whatsoever with how Colombians were embracing it. They were embracing it in a big way because it was clearly like a good thing. I'm not sure what COVID's going to do to the whole, Medellin being a digital nomad hotspot. But at least when I was there, I found the locals to be incredibly accommodating, and, they'd kind of like laugh at the expats, but I was kind of like on their side pretty quickly. I was like, yeah, maybe you should have a fucking shower after you've been hiking for 8 hours before, even if you're just like sitting on some stools outside having a couple of ales. So yeah, no, that they were really cool, the locals.
My comparison to that is like the first time we went to Japan, and like we spent 10 days there, and I think over that 10 days in Japan, I think I saw about 4 or 5 Caucasian people that entire time. And we traveled, I think, 5 cities. We were using the Shinkansen, the bullet train. And when we eventually bumped into some Caucasians, we didn't know what to say. Like, we sort of didn't want to talk to them. We're just like, oh, go away. Like, this is, who are you? And then we've been back, I mean, well, personally, I've been back like 8 or 9 times over the years. And every time I've gone back, there's more and more foreigners there. You can see it. And ever since Jetstar opened up all their cheap flights to Japan, well, fuck me. It's just, I mean, the flight going there, you're just you're in a tin can of bogans getting ready to go and drink a bunch of sake in Tokyo or wherever they end up. And I've seen, at least from my experience, and it might not be reality, but I've seen the experience that I have with Japanese people in the way that they treat foreigners coming into the country, where when I first went there, and maybe I'm just a little bit more in tune with it, so it's a little bit biased, but people had a real fascination. They wanted to talk to you. There wasn't a lot of people coming to the country. You weren't inundated with a lot of foreigners, a lot of Caucasian people. And for us, I mean, we had the long hair, we had the band t-shirts and all that sort of stuff. So that attracted people as well. And so we had lots of cool stories of those first couple of times we went over there. But then the last few times, and I guess it's more probably the hot spots where tourists would tend to go, but I just noticed that there's just so many people there now that it's just, I think the local Japanese population are desensitized to it. It's just like, we're used to it. And I guess maybe the next generation of people are coming through. They're a little bit more of an open country now. So they've got a lot more Western culture coming through that they're exposed to as well. I think for me, like, it's so funny because part of me is like, I hate it. Like, I want to be the special white guy in Japan, but then you realize that you're just one of many white people that are going there. Like, you're not Japanese, so I can't get annoyed at my own people. So it's interesting because I've never been to Bali, but I've always been turned off by Bali because of the reputation, and it's just a bunch of bogans going there and getting pissed.
Yeah, me too.
And taking advantage of cheap, cheap accommodation, cheap piss, and everyone being your servant. And so, but at the same time, I love the idea of stationing yourself in different parts of the world and experiencing different cultures. But I'm always, I guess it's always been something front of mind where I'm thinking about what kind of impact am I actually having on the people that already live there? And you kind of want to blend in, you kind of want to be a part of the woodwork in a way, but in a lot of cases you probably just stand out unless you know the language and you understand the culture and you've been there for a long time. You're going to stand out no matter what, I guess.
Yeah, like I just used to have so much fun in Medellin because I found such a cool group of expat buddies where we would go out, and that was a lot of the inspiration for kind of like at least some of the kind of like less salacious fun times in the books, like flying around, drinking at bars, and like playing pool and stuff like that. I drew on a lot of my personal experience to do all that stuff, and you can see. The thing is that like if you'd come to Medellin like 15 years prior to that, you actually would have been unique and interesting. And so that was kind of like the funny thing, that like a lot of expat guys would go over there and assume that like girls would be interested in them because they'd be like American. And it's just like, dude, you should have come here in 2002. That's not the case anymore. And so kind of like it was this kind of like weird little paradise, but for me at least, it felt kind of it created problems for me where I was like, this is a little bit, I should maybe retire here. It's a little too easy for me to get by here. I kind of like miss the struggle of New York a little bit as well. And so with the book, I guess I was like, it's not really a book where I'm kind of like just listing out all the kind of like cultural differences and like, here you can do this in Australia, but you can't do this in Colombia, or like just like zeroing in on the cultural difference. I guess it's more kind of like an emotional story of like, what will like lost people do if they get really desperate and they collide with each other in just the right/wrong way. And I've tried to make it really modern as well, because I think that like that's a big gripe that I have with a lot of books, is that it's maybe set in the modern day, but it reads like a novel from 50 years ago in terms of the language and kind of like the sequencing of events and stuff like that. Whereas I tried to kind of like use the character's obsession with technology and social media that we kind of all experience to to kind of like tap into that like ennui, that like emotional turmoil. So, like in retrospect, like when I step out from it, I could see how some people could see this book as like, oh, this is like being really harsh on expats and fair to Colombians. But then I also see the opposite takeaway at the same time. It would be completely fair, and it. For me, it's like it doesn't really bother me either way, because it wasn't really my focus. It was more kind of like the emotional, like what do lost people with a bit of time, a little bit of money, and some kind of like some internet now. What type of mischief could they get up to?
And you see it now anyway. You see it, obviously not sort of people diving into the dark web, so to speak, on a day-to-day basis, but you're watching people sort of getting intoxicated by crypto, and all these other things that are happening sort of, across our social media feeds, and people just throwing spare coin or their life savings at things in the hope that it's going to get them out of some problem that they don't actually understand what the problem is that they're in. Everyone's. Yeah. I think a lot of people. As you said, that I think a lot of people are lost because they're so fixated and distracted by what everybody else is doing that they're not understanding where they actually fit into the world. And so whenever something, glittery or shiny sort of comes along and promises the world, that they sort of latch onto it and then worry about the consequences later. And we're certainly seeing that happen all the time on a day-to-day basis, where everyone's very much fixated on the short term, and it's that short term sort of, what can we grab? What sort of return on investment can we get? And a lot of people crashing and burning big time. So I think in that aspect, those storylines around the characters are ultra relatable, whether it be yourself or knowing people that are in that same situation, and also just what you said before about sort of. I'm sort of using my own words here, but to modernize it a little bit and putting some sort of references and things like that. I felt so fucking dirty every time you mentioned like Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, like all these things. I'm like, oh man, this is me. Like I meant to, like, because to begin with, I'm like, these characters suck. Like these are not guys that I would be hanging out with. And then suddenly they're talking about all these things. I'm like, man, I've got that fucking book on the bookshelf. Like, oh damn it, I listened to that podcast. Oh, you know. But it was cool because I think it really brought everything to now. It really made everything ultra present. It wasn't sort of me reading a story from 20 years ago or from a different era, somewhere that I was ultra detached from. It was people that ultimately I could easily meet at a pub and are very similar to me.
Yeah.
And that made it ultra relatable.
But yeah, like I also tried to not be kind of like too moralistic or judgmental about the antics of the digital nomads, because I think that they're people in the Western world are actually running away from something, you know, at least the ones who try and be digital nomads. I think that like corporate life in big cities in the Western world sucks. I've lived that life. I think that you get like work to the bone for huge corporations. It's soulless. You have to take this incredibly long-term view of like, well, maybe I'll become an executive in 20 years. Like, you know, that there is that like carrot dangling thing that can happen. And so I understand why people turn their back on that and want to pursue other things and, you know, come up with a crypto hustle or listen to too much Gary V and think, you know, I just got to get super positive and genuine with like all that stuff is kind of like, it's the symptom. It's like that there is like an underlying malaise that I think that we have kind of like in the West. And that's what I tried to explore a little bit in terms of like the flashback sequences to Tony's time in Melbourne and him like not properly pursuing his artistic pursuits like he probably should have in his 20s and like what that can lead to. So yeah, it's a weird thing where it was like, I definitely think that, to be clear, the vast majority of expats, digital nomads in Medellin, really nice people, completely normal. There are just like some that have like no self-awareness and don't realize that just because they listen to Tim Ferriss doesn't automatically make them successful or like international playboy Lothario types. And so they're incredibly entertaining to kind of like hate watch on YouTube and you know, their whatever social media output they're doing. So that's kind of like the hyper reality that I was trying to kind of like pilfer for the book.
I mean, you certainly said I love going down YouTube rabbit holes, and every time you go to your homepage on YouTube and that damn algorithm kicks you into something that you don't want to see, and you sort of go, fuck, you know, and you know, the thumbnails are like sort of this clickbait sort of stuff, and even like the ads, you know, I mean, especially when you are listening to podcasts like Tim Ferriss or Rogan or any of these guys where you know, people are talking about, you know, self-development or lifestyle hacks and things like that. That stuff sort of filtrates into other social media apps, and so, you know, you see the trailer videos at the or the roll videos or whatever you call them at the beginning of your YouTube videos of these guys like hanging out in front of a pool and sort of going, hey, you can earn money like me, you know, and he's got his shirt off and there's a couple of chicks in the background or whatever, and you just go, man, that's everything I hate about people right there. Like, there's nothing appealing about this. But you know that, as you said before, like with the corporate stuff, like, I mean, I get that, I totally get it, and I think it gets to a point where people are just so desperate for a shakeup of some sort, you know, and they're looking to jump onto something that looks like it's relatively quick and easy to shake the system up, and 9 times out of 10, it's not going to lead anywhere positive whatsoever.
Yeah, like the you know, and the other thing I should probably mention in terms of the inspiration for the main character is that when I was living in Medellin, there was like 2 big, I guess, Australian-related stories. There was Cocaine Cassie, who got busted, I think, in Bogota, where she was like trying to fly somewhere with tons of coke. I guess like a Chappelle Corby kind of situation. But then there was also just like this random story. I never even followed it up. I just kind of like, I heard about this guy from Perth who was hiding out in Medellin from the police, and I assume like the Narcos guys as well. So that was really kind of like the confluence of like, I need to I'm seeing all the, because originally I was going to write it from the perspective of Brian, who's kind of like the influencer type guy in the story. But then I realized I was like, I'm trying to satirize and lampoon something that I don't really understand. Because I think to really write that perspective, you'd have to like be that person, go through all that kind of like lifestyle, and then take a step back and go, oh, that was a crazy 5 years. Why the fuck was I a dickhead for that long? Then write your book, fictional or otherwise. Whereas I was like, I guess I understand this world and I'm kind of like hate watching it, but I don't truly know what motivates people like that, or how much of it they're like drinking their own Kool-Aid and getting high on their own supply, believe they're bullshit, versus like just kind of like going along with it to try and con other people. So I was like, I need more of my own personal expression. And so when I heard about this guy like hiding out, I was like, fuck, just make that you. Like, pretend that's you. You're from Perth as well, roughly the same age as this guy. How did you get there? And and that was kind of like another, it fell into my lap. And I was like, this is great, because it kind of like, it forces me to take a different angle, and it allows me to be a little bit more non-judgmental. I can turn the judgment towards myself, because I know how much like of a pussy I am in terms of like, or at least I was in my younger years, in terms of not pursuing creative outlets as relentlessly I should have. And so I can like roast myself a little bit more versus just trying to adopt someone else's voice, which I didn't understand fully.
I mean, even just the character of Brian, even just, I think the way that you've portrayed him and sort of having him as I don't know what the technical term is when it comes to writing, but having him as a secondary or a third character, sort of, when you're looking at the array of people that are in the book, just the way that you've created him as a character, I think not having him as the center has given you almost a license to make him as ridiculous as possible, because he isn't the set. He's sort of off to the side, and you can sort of like go, oh, I'm just going to throw a little bit of exaggeration here, like even just the stuff where like there's what's he calling himself, Bree or something like that, where he's doing like
Bri.
yeah, and like he's doing his little sort of selfie videos and things like that, and it's just like every time I read that, I'm like, oh, I hate you so much, like, you loser.
Yeah, well, that's good. That was the exact desired effect. But yeah, it's, I don't know. I do like I said, I try and be non-judgmental because I think that there is like and if you read the end, like Brian has somewhat of a turn as well. So I think that it's kind of like a it's in it. I'm really glad I changed the perspective, because I agree. I think that I was allowed me more freedom to perhaps be more fair and probably just like tell a more entertaining story as well.
So the book, correct me if I'm wrong, it came out in December of 2020?
Yeah, December of 2020. Yeah. So
we're getting close to 6 months in. What's the reaction? Because I know it's not the first book that you put out, but has it met the expectations that you were expecting when it came to public reaction or just anything? Like what have you experienced so far?
Yeah, so it is kind of pretty much my first book. I've got another little that was essentially just a short story, the other one, but so I've been really pleasantly surprised, and I think that what's tricky about this book is that it's kind of like a Trojan horse. We were discussing on my show about like heavy metal in terms of the aesthetics. People know kind of that they're going to get something heavy if they look at the artwork, or like, there's something in terms of like the visual aspect. Whereas with like transgressive fiction, oftentimes it's kind of like something just slightly off color with the artwork, is that like, you can't really, this is a pretty extreme book, I'd like to think, in some aspects. And so it's curious when you put it out into the world, because like some people are going to just be like completely surprised. And I think other people are going to be like, oh, this is my jam. This kind of like sits within what I'm used to. And so I've been really pleasantly surprised because like just before I put it out, I spoke with my editor, and because like towards the end, you've gone through so many like, and this must be kind of similar to what you do with like the mixing or the mastering. You've listened to it so many times, or like you've edited it so many times, you kind of lose a bit of perspective. And so I had to ask him, I was like, dude, I don't know whether this is like a fun little jaunt, like a holiday jaunt overseas, or it's like an incredibly fucked up, pangs of existential despair, like cry for help. give me some guidance in terms of like, how should I describe this to people? And he was really helpful. He was like, well, the way I see it is that it's like a celebration and condemnation of toxic masculinity. I was like, hey, that makes sense. It kind of like, I was like, well, first of all, I'm thankful that's what he was picking up, because that's what I was trying to put down. And it gave me some kind of like guidance in terms of how to push it out into the world, in terms of how to describe it on Amazon, or the nuts and bolts side of things. And then also like kind of who to reach out to. So he also told me, he's like, your demographic is like males aged 23 to 35, which he's like, because he used to work for major publishers, and he's like, which unfortunately is like the demographic that doesn't buy books. But he's like, but he goes, the ones that do dig it will really like it, and that demographic apparently like proselytizes as well. So if they enjoy a book, they'll tell their other 23 to 35-year-old male friends to read it. Yeah. So he's like, that's the blessing and the curse of what you've done here. And so I guess like I took all that on board, and I was pretty direct, like in terms of reaching out to people to read it and try and get those first reviews. I kind of like just doubled down onto people who like transgressive fiction. I found people who were into similar authors that I was inspired by. And what's been really pleasing is that I've got tons of positive feedback. I think like the best like thing that you can hear from someone is that they just say, I finished your book. Like there's, that's huge. I think like in the attention span deficit world that we live in, if someone can stick with a fucking novel for 8 hours, however long it would take to read, that's a huge. So I was like, when people started saying, oh, I finished your book, I was like, that's kind of all I need to hear. But then people were following up by saying, I enjoyed it and I want to read the next one as well. So across the board, it's been really positive, and pleasingly, it hasn't just been dudes roughly my age that have liked it either. Because like, like a few women have read it and said they really enjoyed it as well. So that's been really great. I think that like I've got some buddies who write transgressive stuff, and as far as I can gather is that like, if you play, in on your home turf, that's like one thing. But like, as soon as you kind of like start expanding to like people who read other stuff, then you're going to get people turned off by it. But I think for me, it's just been incredibly validating, where I just wrote a book that I want to read. Essentially, that was essentially my MO. And so it's cool to find other people with essentially the same taste, and they've enjoyed it and done me a solid and write good reviews on Goodreads and Amazon. So yeah, to answer your question, I've been really stoked with the response thus far.
Yeah, I assume any sort of some of the things that you mentioned are similar to, I guess, how you would promote a new album, like, music and things like that. You're trying to find your demographic. You're trying to make sure that you can get in front of the right people who can give you some initial reviews and get the momentum going and push things along. But it's a tough thing. And books, I mean, obviously, you can have your Kindle versions, your ebooks and things like that. But the hard copy stuff, like us with CDs and vinyl, it's bulky stuff. It's stuff that you got to try and move. You got to try and move some units, and it's tough. And especially in an era where we are more digital than ever before. It's really, really difficult. I guess and I'm keeping on the time because I reckon I'm feeling myself tiptoe into a topic that I could fucking talk about for hours, and I'm just trying to wrap myself. I feel like I've just got to just kind of pull myself back off the ledge. But have you felt that with I guess the initial sort of first few months of doing this that there is a real connection with physical books and still people wanting to get the hard copies of books, or is it very much a digital space that we're living in now when it comes to reading?
Yeah, I would honestly say it's about 50-50. You know, like some people still really care about it. And there's an interesting thing that I was like pretty much unaware of. There's this like whole booktuber thing where it's generally like pretty young girls in like their early 20s who want to read like Stephen King books and put them on their Instagram and like get dolled up and pose next to the paperback. And so there's like this weird aesthetic thing where it's like, am I looking at the book or your review, or am I looking at you? Like they're kind of like sex sells side of things. So I think that there's like an aspect of like the booktuber reviewer community who want paperbacks because that's going to be better for their Insta. So that's kind of, but fortunately for me, even though there's been a couple people like that who are going to review the book or have reviewed the book, I guess, like, I haven't written a book where like everyone needs a paperback and like, because I think that gets more complicated on the kind of like back end side. So I think that I just really kind of interpret it as like, you don't really know. I'm a one-man band here. I don't have any time to do any fucking market research. I'm too busy trying to write a good book and then trying to write my next good book. So the way I see it is that like, if I'm going to go to all the effort to write a book, I may as well just try and make it available in all the formats. So yeah, I worked with a really shit hot designer who again had like worked with major publishers and stuff. So that made that really easy. I can kind of just be like, he read the book and then it was like, this is what I think the cover should be. And so we figured that out. So that's how the paperback worked. And then, you know, like making sure the ebooks and all, and I'm doing the audiobook, finalizing that now as well. So that will be out in the next month or so. So the way I see it is that like, you just really I'm just trying to give myself the best chance of success. Like if there was like, you know, one or two people had bought a book or vice versa, had bought digital, then I think you'd use that as like information for your next release and be like, maybe not bother with that. But thus far, it seems like it's pretty much split down the middle. So yeah, I feel like they both continue to be important. And yeah, and I also feel pretty strongly about audio as well. I think that like a lot of people are doing that now. And so it's a lot of fucking hard work to narrate and edit an entire audio book, but it's worth it because I think it gives the extra format for people who want that. And then it also makes me a better writer as well, because I'm forced to listen to all my mistakes and all the stuff that didn't work and the things I want to do better. So it's kind of like a slow torture, the process to edit it, but I think it's going to reap rewards in that I'm not going to make the same mistakes. Fingers crossed for the next book.
So you've narrated the entire audiobook?
Yeah.
Fuck
yeah.
Hell. All right, you poor bastard.
Yeah, it was rough. It took me. I fortunately I had a friend to help me. I did it late last year, and I think it took like 3 sessions with him, and then a couple others just by myself. But it worked out to be something like 18, 19 hours of like raw recording, which will come down to like 8 or 9 because there's just like inevitable fuck ups that happen as you're narrating it. So yeah, it's been a lengthy process, but yeah, I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't getting the benefit of, I know it's making me a better writer at the same time.
Yeah, well, so you mentioned before, and it does definitely allude to it at the end of the book, that there might be a follow-up of some sort. What's the current status, or what can you share at the moment as far as what you're working on and the direction that you go next?
Yeah, so I guess yeah, the way book 1 ends, it's actually kind of like neat. The way it ends is that book 1 will be like the pre-COVID book, and then like book 2 will be like what happens to the characters or the ones that survive in a COVID world, essentially. So it's going really well. I think that like writing a sequel using the same characters, it has like advantages and disadvantages. You don't have to recreate an entirely new world. You can kind of like, you have these like storylines in place. And I wrote the first book with some ideas about like where the second one would go. So that was kind of like in a sense planned out and makes it easier. But I guess the challenges are where you're like, I want to do something interesting. I need to, I need to make this work. And so, yeah, I'm enjoying that challenge, and yeah, that's on track. To basically come out towards the end of this year. So, I guess now if you're out there and you want to get on board for the sequel, you got to read the first one.
That's it, definitely. Well, on that note, mate, look, thanks for the chat, and it's been an epic one. I think this has probably been the best way to get to know somebody, is just to do each other's podcasts. It's been really good, man.
Fuck yeah.
And
show me yours, I'll show you mine.
So if people want to pick up the book, where's the best place to go?
Yeah, so you can get the ebook and paperback on Amazon everywhere. So just type in Any Day You Can Die on Amazon. And I'm going to go full Sam Harris here. I know COVID's been pretty rough on a lot of people. So if you're interested in reading the book, but you don't have enough shekels, no worries, mate. Just hit me up on Instagram. It's Thommy Waite on Instagram. Slide into my DMs, and I'll hook you up with a free copy of the ebook. This is inspired by Sam Harris, his waking up meditation app, where I think he says if you want this could benefit your life, but you don't, for whatever reason, no questions asked, you don't have enough cashola. I want to spread the love, or my very dirty type of love, at least.
All right, now go to TommyWaite.com or follow him on the socials at Thommy Waite on Instagram, and I believe on Twitter as well. I'll have everything, of course, in the show notes over at andysocial.net and andydowling.net, including Amazon links to go and purchase the book. And as he mentioned in this chat, if you're a bit strapped for cash, go and hit him up in the DMs, and he'll hook you up with a copy of the book as well, which is pretty amazing, pretty cool. So especially given that he is self-published and self-funded, he's completely independent. The generosity is pretty awesome. So definitely go and follow him, reach out to him, let him know what you thought of the episode. And when you do read the book, make sure you circle back and give him a lovely review and a bit of feedback as well. I'm sure you'd be stoked to hear from you. But a great chat with Thommy Waite. So before we wrap it up, of course, patreon.com/Andy Dowling. Thank you so much for all the support, for sticking with me in my little Patreon community and my journey in this whole sort of crowdfunding, sort of crowd support platform business. It's ultra weird and fun and exciting and all these sort of things. And I'm just super thankful for all the people that continue to support me month in and month out. Patreon.com/Andy Dowling is the best way to support. And one of my goals for this year is to get as many $1 supporters as possible. So guys, if you can spare $1 a month, I'd love to get your support. Get on there. The more that we can get on there, the better. I'd love to see a big community of people supporting. And if you want access to the Patreon podcast episode each week, it's a bit of silliness, a bit of dumb stuff from your mate Andy, a bit of karaoke, some stories. We run through Release Radar on Spotify. We get to listen to a lot of great music, a lot of fucking trash, some YouTube rabbit holes. I talk about books that I've just read. So, for instance, Any Day You Can Die. Spoke about that in one of the previous Patreon episodes. Just a lot of stuff happening in my world, but it's all dumb. It's all fun. It's just a bit of silliness that hopefully will bring a bit of a bright moment to your day each and every week. And there are additional tiers there, of course, for giveaways, free stuff, a whole bunch of stuff over at patreon.com/Andy Dowling. And so what I must do, and I'm trying to find the bloody note here, is to thank my top tier supporters. Where the hell is this bloody note? I literally just had it a moment ago. And I don't want to edit this, and I don't want to record it again. So you guys are going to have to bear with me as I find this little piece of paper. Oh, it's on the ground. That's why. Good work, Andrew. A true professional. Thank you very much to my top tier supporters. These guys are in my top 2 tiers. They are significant contributors to Patreon and to this podcast. So thank you very much to Andrew from Perth, funnily enough, who recommended Thommy Waite for this episode and provided me with a lovely gift of Any Day You Can Die. So thank you very much in particular to Andrew from Perth, but also Mick G from Sydney, Ash from Deniliquin, Dan from Dapto, Rod from Rayleigh in North Carolina, Patrick from Canberra, Liam from Brisbane, Chris from Sydney, Brenda from Leeton, Tim from Canberra, James from Brisbane, Christian from Canberra, Steve from the Gold Coast, and Andrew from Sydney. Thank you very much, guys. These people are part of my wider community of just absolute legends, just great people who are supporting me and the podcast. So go over to patreon.com/Andy Dowling. Join up from $1 a month. Even if you're signing up for only $1 a month, you still get a shout out on the Patreon podcast episode. But if you're in the top 2 tiers, then you'll get a little shout out at the end of these Andy Social episodes as well. So thank you very much, folks, for being a part of my journey, making sure that Andy Social continues to chug away in 2021. The reason why we do 2 episodes a week, it's all because of the Patreon community. So please consider jumping over there and supporting your mate, Andy. Now that's it for another episode of podcasting, and I cannot even tell you who's going to be up next. I think that's just the common theme of 2021. I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. So until next week, folks, take care and ta-ta.